I heard my dad wish I had died before I even knocked on the door. The words drifted through the crack in the frame, carried by the heat from the house and the laughter of people who had no idea. I was standing outside with a birthday gift balanced against my hip. I did not freeze because it was cold. I had been driving through a snowstorm for 9 hours. Cold was something my body understood. I should start with the drive because that was the last part of the day that made sense. I left Cleveland a little after 7 in the morning, which already felt too late for the trip to Buffalo, but I had worked the night before and thought a few hours of sleep would help. It didn't. By the time I merged onto the interstate, the sky had already thinned to that gray-white color that means the weather is making its own decisions now. The radio kept breaking rhythm with static and emergency alerts. Winter storm advisory until midnight. Reduced visibility. Travel not recommended. I kept one hand on the wheel and one hand wrapped around the cardboard handle of a bakery box, making sure it did not tip with every gust. Somewhere past Erie, I realized I had not eaten since the night before. My dashboard clock blinked 10-something in the morning, and the temperature dial read 10 degrees in that stubborn way Ohio weather has of pretending it is doing you a favor. Snow whipped across the windshield so fast it looked alive. I leaned forward, squinting into it, and told myself this was worth it. It was my dad's birthday. I had one chance to hand him the gift I had spent 3 months preparing. At that point, I still believed it mattered. I still believed he would want it from me. There is something about long drives in bad weather that forces you to notice things. The hum of the tires, the way your shoulders climb toward your ears, the slow burn around your eyes. My phone buzzed twice in the cup holder. I knew it was not my dad. He never called first. He always waited for me to reach out, as if affection worked on office hours. I ignored the phone and kept driving. The storm thickened. I kept going. Miles fell away in white drifts. I crossed the state line and released a breath I did not know I was holding. By the time I reached the outskirts of Buffalo, it was dark enough that I could see my own reflection in the windshield. Snow had gathered along the wipers in clumps. My knuckles were red from gripping the wheel. I pulled into my dad's neighborhood a little after 5 in the afternoon. The houses were lined with warm windows and blue Christmas lights even though it was already February. His driveway had been plowed clean, probably by a neighbor. He never liked manual labor once he became a business owner. Too many years of it when he was young, he used to say. I parked at the curb and turned off the engine. Silence settled over the car instantly, as if someone had pressed a mute button on the entire world. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel and took a long breath. The bakery box sat beside me, tied with a navy ribbon. Inside the box was the leather portfolio. Inside the leather portfolio were the documents. Inside the documents was my entire attempt at saving him. I told myself I would give it to him without expectation. I told myself that for the entire 9 hours, and every time I repeated it, that words felt a little thinner. I got out of the car and nearly lost my balance on a sheet of ice hiding under the snow. Lake effect storms have a sense of humor like that. The wind snapped at my coat. I tucked the box under my arm and crunched my way toward the porch. Yellow light spilled from the living room window. I could hear voices inside, laughter. Something clinking, the kind of warm noise a family makes when everyone feels safe. I reached the door. My hand was halfway to the handle when I heard it. My dad's voice. It was unmistakable, even muffled by the door, even softened by years of memory smoothing over the edges. He was laughing. The people around him were laughing too. Then he said the sentence that rearranged the entire night and possibly the entire history of our relationship. I wish she had crashed. The words hit in pieces. Wish she had crashed. Not past tense concern. Not a bad joke. A wish. Someone else said something about insurance, but the voices overlapped and blurred. I leaned closer, not sure I had heard correctly, but the second laugh from my dad confirmed it. He said he had not expected me to make the drive. He said it would have been easier if nature had handled the problem for him. He said it the way people talk about bad roads or late deliveries, an inconvenience solved by luck. I did not knock. My fingers loosened on the box and then tightened again. My body felt hollow. But not the kind of hollow that makes you weak, more like the hollow before a storm snaps a tree in half. I stepped back from the door and looked through the window. My dad was standing near the fireplace. His shoulders were relaxed. He was smiling. He had no idea I was 20 feet away, listening to him casually entertain the thought of my death. I should have cried. Most people would have cried. My face stayed still. My hands stayed steady. The only thing I felt was a kind of cold that had nothing to do with the weather. A cold that came from the inside and worked its way outward with a calm efficiency. I walked back down the porch steps. Snow collected on the bakery box. The wind stung the side of my face. I reached the car, opened the door, and set the box on the passenger seat. I sat there for a moment, letting the heat from the seat warm through the layers of my coat. My phone buzzed again. I did not look at it. The house behind me glowed like a postcard, full of light and warmth, and absolutely none of it was meant for me. People talk about shock like it is explosive, like everything happens at once. For me, it was quiet, methodical. I replayed the sentence in my head and felt it settle. I wish she had crashed. I did not know which part hurt more. The wish, the ease, or the casual tone, as if my life had become a rounding error in someone else's spreadsheet. Snow surged against the windshield and then slid away in streaks. I watched it without really seeing it. The gift sat beside me like a second passenger. The documents inside represented hours of negotiation, pages of projections, the kind of work people paid consultants thousands of dollars to do. I had done it for free. I had done it for my family. Family, I reminded myself, is not a promise. It is a pattern. I pressed my palm against the top of the box and closed my eyes. The storm rattled against the car. Somewhere inside the house, my dad was still laughing. The sound did not reach me now. Nothing did. I opened my eyes and looked at the front door one last time. Not with longing, with clarity. The kind of clarity that arrives only after you hear the truth spoken so plainly that there is nothing left to interpret. I did not go inside. I did not knock. I did not breathe for a moment. And then I stepped backward off the porch, the bakery box tucked again under my arm. Snow collected along the ribbon. My body kept moving before my mind caught up. I walked back down the steps, crossed the small stretch of walkway, and opened my car door. Warm air clung inside the cabin from the drive. I lowered the box onto the passenger seat, then sat and closed the door. The storm rattled against the roof, a steady drumming that made the interior feel smaller than it was. I let out a long breath. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. Shock will do that. It freezes everything except thought. The bakery box remained exactly where I had set it. The ribbon sagged slightly where the snow had melted through. I pulled it closer and lifted the lid. The leather portfolio lay exactly as I had packed it that morning. Neat, intentional, hopeful. I rested my fingers on the clasp, then opened it. The documents inside were still crisp and flat. Signed agreements, a letter of introduction, a 5-year plan. Months of work. A version of my life I thought would matter to him. I took the first stack of papers and tore it cleanly down the center. The sound was sharp, final. Then I tore the next, and the next. I did not rush. Each sheet separated with a calm accuracy that did not feel like anger. It felt like comprehension. When every page had become a scattering of jagged white pieces, I placed them back inside the leather portfolio. From the outside, it still looked complete. Intact, presentable. Inside, it held only the truth. I reached into the bakery box for the small envelope I had written the night before. I read the first line, then tore it in half. I found a blank card, uncapped a pen, and wrote 4 simple words. Happy birthday, Dad. I am still alive. I placed the new note on top of the shredded papers, closed the portfolio, and returned it to the bakery box. Then I tied the ribbon back into a loose knot and held the box against my chest for a moment. Not sentiment, stability. Outside, the wind pushed snow sideways across the street. I opened the car door and stepped out. The cold was immediate, biting, but it brought clarity instead of pain. I walked toward the porch again. My boots left clean impressions that filled slowly behind me as the wind swept through. I set the box gently at the door. I pressed the doorbell once. Just once. Enough to be heard. Not enough to invite conversation. Then I turned away before any sound inside could reach me. I walked back to the car, brushed snow from the windshield, and slid behind the wheel. I closed the door softly. I did not look at the house again. I started the engine, adjusted my grip on the wheel, and pulled away from the curb. The storm swallowed the yellow porch light behind me. Buffalo became a blur of drifting white and the faint glow of street lamps. I kept driving until the neighborhood disappeared completely in the rear view mirror. What mattered was the decision. The rest would come later. I drove until the lights behind me were nothing but a faint glow swallowed by the storm. And then, without warning, a memory rose so sharply it felt like someone had tapped me on the shoulder. It was an old image, softened by time. My dad is standing in our garage in Cleveland with grease on his hands and a half-built engine beside him. I could not have been more than 10 years old. He was explaining torque ratios using a broken bicycle, the same way other dads explained multiplication tables. He said numbers told the truth if you knew how to listen. Back then, he sounded like a man building something solid, something permanent. It was strange how easily that version of him came back to me now, while the man laughing about my death felt like a stranger I had met only a few hours earlier. He had moved to Buffalo years later, long after the garage and the grease and the evenings where numbers made sense. The highway curved gently, and I adjusted the wheel with a motion I barely registered. Snow layered the pavement like powdered glass, thick enough that I could not see the edges of the shoulder. I slowed slightly and let the memory continue. That garage had been the first place my dad taught me about responsibility. He said work was its own language, that if you showed up and did what needed to be done, people respected you. I believed him. For a long time, those lessons shaped everything I did. The job I chose, the hours I spent perfecting things most people never noticed, the way I measured my worth in tasks completed instead of affection received. Another memory surfaced. This one from when I was 14. I had failed a math test, the only one I had ever really struggled with. I brought the paper to him, expecting irritation, maybe disappointment. Instead, he sat beside me at the kitchen table and said failure was a tool, not a verdict. He drew diagrams on napkins and turned the whole thing into something almost funny. I remember laughing with him. I remember thinking he understood me better than anyone else ever could. Somewhere between those years and now, something in him had shifted. It did not happen in one moment. It happened in increments, like erosion, subtle enough at first that I kept explaining it away. Work stress, long hours, the pressure of owning a business in an unpredictable economy. He did not gamble back then. He did not disappear for entire weekends. He did not lie about where he had been or who he owed money to. The man in my memories had principles. The man in my memories worked with his hands and wiped sweat off his forehead with a shop towel he kept tucked into his back pocket. The snow thickened again, pulling me out of the past for a few seconds. I switched lanes to avoid a drifting patch that looked deeper than the rest. My headlights illuminated the swirling flakes and the faint outlines of the road signs pointing toward the interstate loop. Cleveland was still hours away. I glanced at the dashboard clock, but I did not register the numbers. Time felt irrelevant. The storm existed and I was moving through it. That was enough. When I let my thoughts drift again, they fell into the years between 2017 and 2019, the period when I first sensed something was wrong. My dad started forgetting things he never used to forget. Payments, orders, deadlines. He brushed it off with a joke about getting older, but I noticed the tension in his jaw, the way he pinched the bridge of his nose like he was trying to push a headache back into his skull. I offered to help with some of the administrative work. He said he had it handled. He said it a little too firmly. Then came the first loan, a small one. He said it was temporary. A short-term bridge. He used words like tide and season, the kind of language people lean on when they want to avoid saying the real word, which in his case was debt. I believed him because believing him was easier than confronting them. Possibility that something larger was unraveling. After that came the second loan, then the third, each one slightly larger than the last, each one accompanied by a new explanation. Equipment failure. Supply chain delays, vendor issues. The justifications changed, but the pattern stayed the same. He asked for money without asking for help. He refused to let me look at the books. When I pressed, he grew defensive. When I backed off, he acted relieved. It was a dance we both, and I played my part because he was my dad, and I thought loyalty meant patience. The first time he disappeared for a weekend, my mom called me. Her voice was tight, brittle in the way people sound when they have been worried for too long. She asked if I had heard from him. I had not. She told me he had taken the company truck and said he needed a break. He returned late Sunday night, smelling like stale beer and something sharper. He apologized to her, but not to me. He said he would do better. He said it with the confidence of someone who believed saying the words was enough. The memory of that night pressed against me like a weight. We had stood in the driveway, him leaning heavily against the truck door, me standing a few feet away with my arms crossed. I asked him if everything was all right. He avoided my eyes. He said he had everything under control. He said it the way a drowning man might insist he is enjoying the swim. The road signs blurred past again, coated with frost. I adjusted the temperature on the heater and leaned back into my seat. A different memory surfaced, one I had not thought about in years. I was 21, fresh out of college, and he showed up at my apartment with a toolbox to help hang shelves. He insisted on measuring every angle twice. He talked me through the process even though I understood it. It was not about the shelves. It was about time, presence, care. That day he was patient. That day he was still the man I thought he would always be. Looking back, I can see the cracks forming earlier than I recognized then. A missed birthday call, a holiday cut short because he claimed he had urgent work to do, the casual way he dismissed people he had known for years, the frustration that seemed to spill out of him in small comments that had sharper edges than before. But I kept smoothing those edges in my mind, convincing myself these were normal shifts, the natural wear and tear of adulthood. It was around 2019 when the gambling began. He did not announce it. I learned about it the same way you learn about most secrets, by accident. I found a receipt in his truck one afternoon when he asked me to grab a folder from the back seat, a slip of paper from a casino 2 hours away. He waved it off when I asked. He said he had just driven through on the way to a supplier and stopped for a coffee. It was the kind of lie that depended on the listener wanting it to be true. I wanted it to be true, so I let it be true. But then there was another receipt. Then another. Then a credit card statement he left open on the kitchen counter during Thanksgiving. I saw the numbers before he snapped the folder shut. I did not say anything. Not then. I was still telling myself the version of him I loved was the real one, and the rest was temporary noise. The storm outside softened for a moment, giving me a brief stretch of clearer road. I loosened my grip on the wheel and let the tires glide across the smoother pavement. The quiet gave room for another memory, this one from the early days of his business. He used to bring me to the workshop on Saturdays. I would sit on a tall stool while he repaired machinery. The air smelled like metal shavings and lemon cleaner. He would explain how every part had a purpose, and if one piece failed, the whole system broke down. I think about that now and wonder if he ever saw himself as the failing piece, or if he always assumed someone else would hold the weight when he slipped. The thing about nostalgia is that it does not ask permission. It pulls you back whether you want to go or not. It paints the past in hues you can no longer trust. Even as I remembered the good moments, I could feel something shifting in me, an awareness that the man from those memories no longer existed. He had not existed for years. I had been holding onto a shadow, a silhouette that collapsed the moment I saw him clearly. I passed a row of snow-covered trees and watched their branches bend under the weight. There was a tenderness to it, a quiet resilience, the same kind I used to believe my dad possessed. Maybe he had possessed it once. Maybe that was the version of him I kept trying to revive. The version who taught me how to calculate risk. The version who said family meant showing up even when it was inconvenient. The version who would never have joked about my death in a room full of people. The realization felt like something detaching inside me, a tether coming loose. For the first time since the night began, I felt the old loyalties fall away. Not in anger, but in acceptance. I had been trying to save a man who was no longer there. The one who remained had chosen everything else over me, over himself, over the truth. The highway dipped toward an open stretch where the wind swept across them, asphalt in long, shifting patterns. I watched the snow blow in sheets and thought of all the years I had spent, trying to hold the center for both of us. I had patched and reasoned and forgiven. I had filled in every gap he left behind, but nothing I did could restore the man he used to be. That man was gone. What remained was someone who had looked at my absence and seen relief. I let out a slow breath and felt my shoulders drop. The past had explained enough. The storm was still fierce, but the weight of memory had lightened. I could see the road more clearly now, not because the weather had improved, but because I had stopped trying to make the view match something it no longer was. I kept driving, letting the miles unfold without resistance. The man in my memories stayed behind me, just like the house I had left and the sentence I had heard. There was no anger now, only clarity, the kind that comes when you finally admit a truth you have been circling for years. The man I loved, the man who raised me, the man who taught me about responsibility and purpose, was gone. He had been gone for a long time. I was the one who refused to see it. The storm shifted again, and the road curved gently south. I followed the line of light ahead of me, and for the first time that night, I felt something close to steady. I drove on, letting the realization settle, knowing it would shape everything that came next. The road curved south, and I followed it, steady and quiet, letting the realization settle in me like sediment. The past had explained enough. What came next required a different kind of clarity, the kind that did not soften anything with nostalgia. It was only once I pulled into a rest stop outside Erie that the next piece of challenges believed. The truth surfaced, not as a shock, but as a calculation I had been avoiding for months, maybe years. I parked between two snow-coated pickup trucks and shut off the engine. The storm had eased into a fine mist that drifted across the lot like smoke. I rested my head against the seat and let my eyes close for a few seconds. The hum of the fluorescent lights above the fuel pumps filtered through the windshield, a faint buzzing that sounded almost mechanical. My hands were still warm from the steering wheel, but my chest felt cold in a way I could not blame on the weather. I opened my eyes and reached for my purse on the floor. My wallet sat inside, thicker than usual, because of the small envelope I had tucked into it months earlier. The envelope contained my life insurance policy. I pulled it out without really thinking. The same instinct that draws people to touch a bruise just to confirm it still hurts. The paper was slightly creased at the edges from being carried around for so long. I slid the document free and unfolded it across the steering wheel. My name printed neatly at the top. My address in Cleveland. The date of activation, 2016. The monthly premiums. The coverage amount. And at the bottom, written in the same black ink I remembered from the day I signed the forms, the designated beneficiary. My dad. I stared at that name for a long moment, not because it surprised me. It did not. At 20 years old, naming my dad had seemed logical, responsible. He was the person I trusted, the person who had taught me about work and integrity and showing up. It had never occurred to me to change it after I moved out or after the cracks began forming in his life. There was always something more urgent, something more immediate. So the policy sat there unchanged, a relic of a time when I believed the ground under us was stable. I traced the date with my fingertip. 2016. 7 years before the night he wished aloud that I had crashed. 7 years before the debts grew teeth and the gambling turned from a hobby he denied to a problem he could not hide. 7 years before I learned how much a signature could weigh. The funny part is that I used to joke about the storm being the worst place to die. Not seriously, just the kind of dark humor you use to make long drives feel less like a chore. I had said it once at a family dinner, years ago, when the news was full of winter accidents. My dad laughed then, a warm laugh, the kind that made me feel like we understood something about the world together. I think about that now, and it feels like remembering a movie I once watched, but can no longer picture clearly. I folded the document back up and held it in my hands. The edges of the paper felt sharp. I thought about the storm I had driven through, about the way the snow had erased the road, about the moments the wind had shoved the car hard enough that the tires skidded a few inches across the pavement. Accidents happened in weather like that. Real accidents. Natural accidents. The kind no one questioned. I put the envelope back in my wallet and sat quietly for several breaths. My pulse felt steady, almost too steady. There is a moment when denial stops being protective and becomes useless. I had reached that moment sometime earlier that night, but only now did the full logic assemble itself in my mind with the clarity of a completed puzzle. My dad did not just say he wished I had crashed. He meant it. He meant it because everything in his life had collapsed into a single arithmetic. What he owed, what he had lost, what might save him. And the storm had offered a neat solution, one that required nothing of him except silence and a little luck. I let that truth settle, not with rage, but with a cold, factual acceptance. If anyone else had said the sentence, I would have brushed it off as cruelty. But coming from him, it was a strategy. A man drowning in financial quicksand does not reach for the nearest stable branch. He reaches for whatever floats, even if it is a person. A semi-truck rumbled into the rest stop and idled several spaces away. Its headlights swept across the interior of my car, bright enough to make me squint. I started the engine again, not because I was ready to drive, but because I needed the heat back. The windshield fogged along the edges and then cleared as the vents warmed. I held my hands near the air and watched the condensation dissolve. I thought about the debts he carried. Not exact numbers, but enough to know the crisis when I saw it. Enough to know that some of the people he owed money to were not the kind who sent polite reminders. Enough to know that he had run out of legitimate avenues. And enough to know that he had never once asked me for help directly. He had implied, he had hinted, he had complained, but he never asked. Asking would have forced him to confront the reality he had been dodging for years. Instead, he had made comments about my job at Turncore Advisors, jokes about how convenient it would be for him if I could restructure his problems. He never said it outright, but the tone told me everything. I used to laugh those moments off. I thought he was nervous, embarrassed. Now I saw the truth. He was assessing me, seeing how far I might go, seeing what I might do. The snow outside had slowed to a faint drift. I shifted in my seat and looked out at the highway stretching into the dark. Somewhere in the distance, Buffalo lay wrapped in lights and laughter and the echo of his sentence, "I wish he had crashed," followed by the comment about insurance. I had not caught every word after that, but I remembered enough tone to fill the rest in. Another memory surfaced. This one recent. At Thanksgiving, he had made a joke about my job paying well enough that if anything happened to me, he hoped I had been smart about beneficiaries. Everyone laughed, including me. It felt harmless, a throwaway line from someone who had read too many financial blogs. Now, under the fluorescent glow of the rest stop, the joke felt like a rehearsal. I realized then that the storm had offered him something he no longer believed he deserved in any other part of his life. A reset. A reprieve, a way out, and that I had been naive enough to walk straight into the possibility without, thinking anyone would calculate me as an asset instead of a daughter. I put the car back into drive and rolled out of the parking lot. The snow made a soft crunch beneath the tires. As I merged back onto the highway, the cold inside me deepened in a way that felt strangely stabilizing. Anger would have scattered me. Fury would have cracked me open. But this was not anger. It was comprehension, a clean line connecting every moment of the past few years. The loans, the lies, the disappearances, the quiet desperation behind his eyes, the way he avoided my questions, the way he leaned too heavily on optimism, the way he winced whenever I asked to see the numbers, the way he talked about luck as if it were currency, the way he had become a man who looked for shortcuts instead of solutions. As the miles passed, the highway grew emptier. The storm faded into a quiet haze. My headlights illuminated only what was directly ahead of me. It was enough. I no longer needed to see further. I had seen enough for one night. The realization settled fully then. Existential rejection. That was what this was. Not the petty kind, where someone ignores your messages or forgets your birthday. This was deeper, colder. The kind that measured your life against a financial outcome and found the outcome more appealing. The kind that asked what your loss might solve. I tightened my hands on the steering wheel. My breath came out slow and controlled. The calmness surprised me again, but I did not fight it. It felt earned. The road signs eventually began pointing toward Cleveland. Home. Or what passed for it. My apartment. My own quiet space. My own life. Separate from the man who had raised me and the man he had become. Two different men, existing in the same body, separated by years of choices I had not made. I drove past a long row of empty fields covered in snow. The moon pressed through the clouds just enough to cast a soft silver line along the horizon. I followed its glow without thinking. By the time I crossed the state line, something inside me had settled completely. The man from my childhood was gone. The man from the house in Buffalo had taken his place, and the part of me that still hoped for a reunion with the older version finally fell silent. I kept driving, the clarity tightening around me like a steady and necessary cold. And somewhere on the long stretch of highway between Erie and Cleveland, another realization rose to the surface, quieter but heavier than anything that had come before. What I had torn inside that leather portfolio was not just paper. It was 3 months of my life. 3 months of late nights and early mornings and careful calculations laid out across my kitchen table. 3 months of believing I could still save something that had already begun, collapsing under its own weight. 3 months I had never told anyone about, not even my closest friend at Turncore, and certainly not my dad. The green highway signs blurred past on my right as I adjusted the heat and leaned back in my seat. My shoulders finally began to unclench, which made room for the memories I had been avoiding. The beginning of it all had been sometime in November, a quiet Thursday afternoon at work, when my boss Sarah stopped by my desk with a stack of reports. She asked if I could review them before the Monday meeting, and I nodded the way I always nodded. That was when my phone buzzed. A text from my mom. "Just checking in. Your dad is stressed again. He mentioned the business is slowing down. Again." There was nothing unusual about that message. The business had been slowing down for years, but something about the timing pulled me out of the reports and into a worry I could not name. After work, I drove home, made coffee I did not need, and opened my laptop. I found myself searching for public filings related to Carter Precision Parts, debt records, vendor complaints, a lien I did not know about. None of it huge on its own, but together they formed a weight that pressed against my chest. That was the night I started building the plan. I told myself it was harmless research, a little preliminary work. I did not tell Sarah because I knew exactly what she would say. She had already warned me 3 separate times that year about mixing family and clients. She said it gently, kindly, the way people do when they want to save you from yourself. She told me restructuring only worked when the person at the center of it was willing to face the numbers. I always agreed with her, in theory, but that night I became someone who broke her own rules. Someone who opened spreadsheets after midnight and dragged vendor credit histories into sortable columns. Someone who reached out to a colleague in confidence and asked hypothetical questions about a business with shrinking margins and inconsistent cash flow. Someone who mapped out a 5-year plan on the back of a receipt because the idea would not wait for a fresh notebook. In December, the work deepened. I started coming in early so I could use the office before anyone else arrived. Turncore advisors had a view of Lake Erie that looked gray and metallic in winter. But the quiet before sunrise had become a refuge. I sat in the corner conference room with my laptop open, the room lit only by a single desk lamp I carried from space to space. I ran numbers for hours. Profit and loss projections, amortization schedules, consolidation scenarios. I made calls to 3 different creditors, each conversation layered with professional tone and personal urgency. I negotiated settlements as if they were for a client I had never met, because detachment was the only way I could stay afloat. One afternoon, Sarah paused outside the conference room and tapped on the door frame. She asked if everything was all right. I told her I was catching up on firm work. She nodded, but her eyes lingered. She said she hoped I was not overloading myself with obligations that did not belong to me. Her voice softened the way it had before, but she did not press. I thanked her for checking in and promised I was fine. I was not fine, but it was easier. Weekends became workdays. I sat at the small dining table in my Cleveland apartment with stacks of papers around me and a hot mug of coffee slowly cooling beside my laptop. I kept my blinds closed. I kept the television off. I kept telling myself that the pace was temporary, that the pressure was manageable, that once everything was finalized and delivered, I could breathe again. It was the kind of lie that sounds almost reasonable when the goal feels noble enough. January arrived with its usual sense of urgency. I reached out to an investor contact named Lucas, someone who owed me a favor. He agreed to review the proposal. He said the numbers looked promising and the timeline feasible. He asked if the hypothetical owner understood what the restructuring required. I told him yes. I lied again. Lucas said he would draft a letter of introduction. I thanked him more than once. When the draft arrived in my inbox the next morning, I felt a tightness in my throat that I ignored by drinking coffee too quickly. By the second week of January, I had the outline of the 5-year plan completed. It stretched across nearly 40 pages of analysis, projections, and recommendations. I built it the way I built all my plans. Precise language, clear milestones, tiers of action that grew more aggressive as time passed. The kind of plan that could rescue a business if the owner followed it meticulously. I printed the final version on a quiet Sunday night and placed each page into a lovely a binder I kept in my office for important cases. Then I tucked the binder into the leather portfolio I had purchased earlier that afternoon. 3 months, dozens of late nights, hundreds of micro decisions. And not once did I tell my dad. I kept imagining the day I would hand him the portfolio, the way his face might soften, the way his shoulders might drop in relief. I thought he would let me help the way parents let their children help when they finally understand the world well enough to offer something of value. I thought this was going to be that moment. But the night of his birthday changed everything. The road ahead of me shimmered with a thin layer of ice. I tightened my grip on the wheel as I remembered the final 2 days before the trip. I had stayed late at the office after everyone left and went through the documents one last time. I adjusted a few lines in the projection tables, recalculated the interest rate assumptions, refined the narrative summary. I added a printed copy of the investor letter. I triple-checked the signatures from the creditors. Then I placed everything inside the leather portfolio and fastened the clasp. I remember sitting back in my chair afterward, exhausted but proud. It was the first time in months I had felt something close to hope. I carried that hope with me in the bakery box on the passenger seat as I drove to Buffalo. It sat beside me through every mile of that storm. Every moment I leaned forward, squinting at the whiteout conditions. It sat beside me through the moments I nearly slid into the shoulder, and the moments I turned down the radio because the static felt too loud in my chest. I talked to myself during the worst stretches, telling myself this was the right thing, that family required effort, that doing nothing would have been the real betrayal. It is unsettling how quickly hope can transform, how something that once felt like possibility can become evidence of your own miscalculation. I felt it the moment I opened the portfolio in my car outside his house, the moment I saw the papers I had crafted with such precision. They represented a future for him, but they also represented a version of me that kept believing he was someone he no longer was. The rest stop signs blurred past as I continued south, my eyes stung with tiredness, not sadness. There was a strange peace in knowing I had done everything I could, even if it had been misguided. The shredded papers in the portfolio were not a symbol of anger. They were a symbol of acceptance, a recognition that I could not save a man who did not want saving, or worse, a man who saw me as expendable. I passed the exit for Ashtabula and felt a faint sense of relief, knowing Cleveland was not too far away. The highway opened into a long, straight path, and I let the car settle into its rhythm. The storm had eased into a soft flurry. The wind quieted. My own thoughts slowed enough that I could finally see the shape of the truth I had been circling. The documents I had torn were worth more than the plan itself. They were worth the time, the effort, the months of emotional labor I had poured into them. Each page had been an act of faith, not faith in numbers, because numbers always made sense. Faith in him. Faith in the possibility that if I just handed him the right tools, he might choose a different path. But he had already chosen, long before I arrived at that house. Long before he stood near the fireplace laughing with people who had no idea about the weight he carried. Long before he said the words that would echo in my memory even as the storm swallowed the rest of the night. I eased into the right lane and prepared to take the exit toward downtown. The lights of Cleveland glowed faintly in the distance, warmer than the storm I had left behind. For the first time since the whole night began, I felt something like steadiness return to me, not because I believed everything would be all right, but because I understood what I had let go of. I had spent 3 months constructing a lifeline for him. Now I was learning how to release my own. I took the exit toward downtown, and the familiar curve of the road pulled me forward, steady as a guide rope. By the time I reached my neighborhood in Cleveland, the snow had thinned in 12, small drifting flakes that looked harmless compared to what I had driven through. I turned onto Superior Avenue and followed it until the streetlights gave way, to the quiet strip near the old motel I had passed a dozen times, but never once imagined I would walk into. My hands felt oddly calm on the steering wheel, the kind of calm that comes after a storm, in every sense of the word. I pulled into the parking lot behind the building. The sign flickered, trying and failing to stay lit. The office appeared empty, but the door was unlocked. Inside, the heater rattled and a notepad sat on the counter next to a metal bell. No one came. Not even after I tapped the bell once. I left 2 20s on the desk and took a key from the hook labeled Room 12. Not the best method of check-in, but I did not have the energy for explanations or small talk. I walked back outside, boots crunching through thin snow, and found the room. Inside, the air held a faint smell of old carpet and cleaning solution. The bedspread was heavy and patterned with dark shapes I could not identify in the dim light. I set my keys on the dresser and sat on the edge of the bed. The room felt suspended in time, neither comforting nor hostile, a place meant for passing through. That suited me. I lay back without turning on the lamp. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again. And again. I took it out only long enough to turn it off completely. The silence afterward felt like someone had placed a warm blanket across my chest. I closed my eyes and let the room settle around me. I was not hiding. I was not lying. I had simply stepped out of the frame for a moment. No explanations included. Sometime after I drifted into sleep, I dreamed of driving through snow again. When I woke, the ceiling was still above me, slightly discolored in one corner from old water damage. My clothes were wrinkled. My legs ached. It took me a few seconds to remember where I was. The motel room was dimly lit by the weak morning light sneaking through the back curtains. I sat up slowly and exhaled. For a moment, the peace held. Then everything that had happened the night before returned with perfect clarity. Buffalo, the storm, my dad's voice through the door, the sentence that cut through the weather, the shredded papers in the portfolio, the box on the porch, the soft glow of the porch light before I walked away. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and let my feet rest on the carpet. A faint hum from the heater filled the silence. I considered turning on my phone. The thought alone made my stomach tighten. Instead, I walked to the small bathroom, washed my face with cold water, and stared at myself in the mirror. My eyes looked tired but steady. There was no trace of last night's storm except the faint imprint of exhaustion in the corners. When I finally stepped back into the room, I noticed the weight in my chest had shifted. Not gone, just different. The clarity I found on the highway had settled in me in a new way. I sat at the edge of the bed again, listening to the heater rattle. The room felt strangely protective. My phone stayed off. Far from me, back in Buffalo, the night must have moved forward without me. I imagined the house, lights dimming after the party. My dad eventually noticed the box on the porch. He would have picked it up, maybe muttered something under his breath. He would have closed the door against the cold and carried it inside. In my mind, I could see him at the kitchen table, loosening his tie, lifting the lid. He would have seen the leather portfolio first. That familiar shape, the weight of it. I knew exactly how his expression would have shifted, how his shoulders would have stiffened, how a flicker of hope might have shown itself. Hope that the thing he wanted most that night still waited inside, a lifeline in paper form. He would have opened it, seen the shredded pieces, recognized the signatures, recognized what each page had meant, the work he had not done, the work I had done for him. Then he would have seen the note. Happy birthday, Dad. I am still alive. I did not need to picture his reaction beyond that point. Reality would catch him soon enough. A man who gambled on luck eventually loses track of what the stakes actually are. He had gambled with my existence, or at least the idea of it, and lost something he had never expected to lose. Not money, not business, something quieter and far more permanent. The heater clicked off, leaving the room in silence. I picked up my coat, shook it out, and hung it on the metal hook near the door. My body felt heavy in a grounded way, like it had finally caught up with my mind. There was a stillness inside me I had not felt in years. Not because things were fixed, because they were finally honest. I opened the curtains about an inch to see outside. The morning was pale and cold, the parking lot half empty. A thin layer of snow clung to the cars. It looked peaceful, ordinary. No one would have guessed a life had shifted this much overnight. Lives rarely look different from the outside. Most of the change happens quietly. Eventually, I did turn my phone back on, but not immediately. I let the morning pass slowly. I showered. I dressed. I ran the motel's thin comb through my hair. I brushed my teeth with the travel-sized toothpaste I kept in my purse. I did all the small things that signal a day has begun, even when everything inside you feels suspended. Only then did I take the phone from my bag and press the power button. It lit up immediately, vibrating hard enough to rattle in my hand. A flood of notifications filled the screen. Missed calls, voicemails, texts from numbers I recognized, texts from numbers I didn't. I watched the alerts keep coming until they slowed, then stopped. The silence afterward felt almost louder than the phone's buzzing. The first missed call was from my dad. The second, too. Then 6 more. Then a voicemail. Another voicemail. And another. My mom had called once. My dad had called again. He had sent messages, short ones, longer ones. Messages with punctuation that looked rushed. Messages without punctuation at all. A progression that told a story of someone realizing, piece by piece, that something had shifted beyond repair. I set the phone on the nightstand without opening any of them. Outside, a truck pulled into the lot and parked 2 spaces down. Someone stepped out, slammed the door shut, and walked inside the motel office. Life moved forward in the most ordinary way, completely unaware of what had happened inside me. The contrast felt strange, but not painful. I lay back on the bed and crossed my arms over my chest. The phone buzzed again. My dad was calling. I watched the screen light up. His name appearing felt like seeing a stranger's name written in familiar handwriting. I let it ring until it stopped. 3 minutes passed before it buzzed again. This time I turned the phone over so I would not have to see it. I was not hiding. I was not punishing him. I was giving the silence the space it needed to become real, letting things settle into their true shape. The phone buzzed again and again. The pattern became a kind of rhythm, a quiet reminder that the world was waiting for me to respond. But the thing about disappearing without lying is that it leaves no trail to argue with, no story to correct, no explanation to offer or defend. It is simply the absence of presence. Eventually, the buzzing stopped. The room grew still. I breathed in the warm air and let my eyes close. I was not lost. I was choosing distance. And for the first time in years, the choice was entirely mine. He finally stopped calling, and the silence settled over the motel room like a heavy blanket. I did not move. I did not reach for the phone. I let the quiet fill the space where panic used to live. And somewhere between the heater's low hum and the thin light sliding through the curtains, sleep pulled me under again. I do not know how long I slept. When I woke, my mind felt clearer, as if the snowstorm in my head had finally drifted past. I sat upright slowly, stretched my arms, and listened. Nothing. No buzzing, no ringing, no footsteps outside my door, just the soft thrum of the heater and the faint creak of the building settling into another cold morning. Back in Buffalo, the sun must have risen too. I pictured the porch light switching off automatically. The snow shifting, the box still sitting where I had left it, unless he had already found it. I imagined him opening it, seeing the portfolio, seeing what was inside it or what was not, and then reading the note. I imagined the moment he understood, the moment the night before finally clicked into place. That was all I thought about until I checked out of the motel with a quiet nod to the woman at the front desk. She did not ask my name. I did not offer it. The world sometimes gives you the exact amount of interaction you are capable of handling. That morning, my limit was almost none. I drove home through gray Cleveland streets, parked in my usual spot, and climbed the stairs to my apartment. I let myself inside, dropped my keys into the ceramic bowl near the door, and locked the deadbolt. The apartment smelled like the lavender candle I had left unlit 2 days earlier. Familiar, insulated, self-contained. It was the first place I had ever lived where my things stayed exactly where I went. Put them. I slipped off my shoes and walked to the couch. Only when I sat down did I turn my phone on again. It lit up in a single eruption. Missed calls, voicemails, messages. Most from him. Some from my mom. A few from numbers I did not recognize. I set the phone face down on the table and let it vibrate until it stopped. He must have found the box hours earlier. He must have registered the meaning behind the shredded papers, the signatures, the missing pieces. the note. All of it would have crashed into him at once. And still, I sat on my couch, breathing, steady. In Buffalo, his panic must have begun long before he started driving. It would have started the moment he opened that portfolio. It would have sharpened with every scrap of paper between his fingers. It would have reached full clarity when he read my handwriting, the sentence that left no room for misunderstanding. Happy birthday, Dad. I am still alive. If he had expected gratitude, he did not get it. If he had expected forgiveness, it was not there. What he received instead was the truth. And truth can make a man run in ways fear never could. By the time the motel's heater clicked off that morning, he had already packed a bag. By the time I walked to my car, he had already started his. By the time I reached my apartment, he was somewhere on the interstate, gripping the steering wheel tight enough to whiten his knuckles. 9 hours. The same distance I had driven for him. The same stormed-out stretch, except the weather had calmed for him, the roads clearing under daylight. He did not fight the whiteouts. He did not face the drifts. He was not risking anything except confrontation. He drove through western New York first, checking his phone every few minutes, calling again, voicemail again, redialing like persistence could bend reality. Then he crossed into Pennsylvania, the long stretch that feels endless even on a clear day. I imagined him rehearsing explanations. No apologies. Apologies require ownership. Explanations are just attempts to rearrange blame into something more palatable. He would have told himself he had misspoken, that I had misunderstood, that he had been joking, that no parent could ever mean something like that. He would have convinced himself I just needed to hear the right tone, the right story, the right justification to shake loose the truth I had seen too clearly. The drive must have become frantic once he reached Ohio. When people lose control of the narrative, urgency becomes their only fuel. He did not drive 9 hours for me. He drove 9 hours for himself, for whatever part of his life he believed he still had a claim to. By mid-afternoon, he reached my building. He parked crooked in the visitor space and climbed out before the engine finished clicking off. He took the stairs 2 at a time, pounding up each flight. His breath came in heavy bursts. He knocked on my door first with his knuckles, then with the side of his fist, then with the flat of his palm. Hard enough that a picture on my wall rattled. Mia, open the door, please. I was not there to hear it, but my neighbor Mrs. Hall was. She lived 2 doors down. 70 years old, sharp as a blade under the soft cardigans she always wore. She heard the pounding, stepped into the hallway, and saw him standing there. She told me about it later in her calm, unfazed voice. She said he kept knocking, calling my name. His face looked pale, frantic. She watched for several seconds before walking closer. She asked if he needed help. He told her he was looking for me. She told him I had left the night before and had not come back. He asked if she was sure. She said yes. She had seen me carry a small bag down the stairs. She had seen me get into my car. She had watched through her curtain as I drove away. She had not seen me return. Not once. Not in the morning, not by noon, not by afternoon. He asked if she knew where I went. She said she did not. He stood there staring at my door, as if staring alone might pull me through it, as if determination could undo absence, as if 9 hours of driving could erase the meaning of a single sentence in a single note. She told me he looked smaller than she expected. Not physically. Something in his posture, something in the way he braced one hand against the doorframe, something in the way his voice cracked when he said my name again, quieter this time. She asked if he wanted her to try calling me. He said no. He kept his eyes on the door like he was waiting for it to change its mind and open. She waited with him for a moment, then stepped back politely. He stayed, not minutes. Longer, long enough that she eventually went back inside her apartment, unsure whether to comfort him or avoid him. Neither would have helped. From where I sat on my couch miles away, I felt none of this, just the silence I had chosen, the space I had needed for years without knowing it, the first breath of a life not lived in reaction to someone else's damage. While he stood in that hallway in Cleveland, 9 hours from Buffalo, surrounded by neighbors who barely knew his name, I was across town pouring myself a glass of water. The contrast would have been cruel if it were not so honest. His 9 hours had been driven by panic, by fear of consequences, by the sudden realization that something he relied on no longer existed. Mine had been driven by love. That was the difference. That was the truth neither of us had spoken aloud until now. When Mrs. Hall came out again later to take out her trash, he was still there, leaning against the railing, staring at my door like it might eventually offer him a different answer. She said he looked like someone waiting for a verdict he already knew was final. Eventually he left. Slowly. Shoulders rounded, steps heavy. He walked down the stairs and disappeared out the side door toward the parking lot. She watched from the landing until his car pulled away. She told me all of this the next day, and her voice never wavered once. By the time she finished, I understood something with a clarity I had never reached before. People show you who they are when they believe they are losing you. My dad had shown me two versions. The one behind the door in Buffalo who wished I had crashed, and the one in the hallway in Cleveland who realized too late what that sentence had cost him. I sat very still as the pieces settled into place, and in the quiet of my apartment something shifted around me, subtle as a change in air pressure. I did not know it then, but while I breathed in the calm of distance, the first wave of consequences had already reached Buffalo. Karma does not announce itself. It does not knock. It simply begins. The next morning, a Saturday, I woke early and made coffee. My hands moved out of habit, steady, without the old urgency. The apartment felt clean and bright, as if it approved of my silence. I checked nothing. I opened nothing. I let the minutes pass like beads sliding on a string. Just existing felt oddly new. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed twice. Not calls. Alerts from the bank. 2 unusual activity warnings, the kind I used to get on my dad's behalf whenever the business account slipped below a certain threshold. Those alerts had always made my chest tighten. This time I simply read them, set the phone down, and rinsed my mug. I was not involved anymore. Later, around noon, my cousin Daniel texted me. I almost laughed seeing his name. We had not spoken since the 4th of July barbecue 2 years earlier, when he asked if I could help his friend refinance a laundromat in trouble. That was our relationship. Occasional requests disguised as conversation. His message read, "Call your dad. Something is happening at the shop." I did not respond. At 1:30 in the afternoon, my mom called. I let it ring. She called again. Then she sent a message that made me exhale through my nose. "Your dad is overwhelmed. You know how he gets. Please don't ignore us right now." Right now. As if timing had ever mattered to anyone but me. I placed the phone face down on the table and went back to folding laundry. By early evening, the updates arrived without me seeking them. Information moves through families like an electric current. Once one person hears something, everyone knows within hours. It began with employees. 3 of them quit that morning. One left a short voicemail saying he had not been paid in 6 weeks. Another posted a comment on social media under the shop's page that said, simply, "Good luck to whoever stays." Someone screenshot it and texted it to my mom. She forwarded it to me with a note that said, "This is embarrassing. Do you know what is going on?" I didn't answer. At 5:15 in the evening, a photo arrived. It came from my Aunt Carol, who lived 10 minutes from my dad. The picture showed a black pickup truck parked crooked in front of the shop, its hazard lights blinking. A man in a thick jacket stood by the door holding a clipboard. The caption under the photo said, "Is this a creditor?" 10 minutes later, she sent another. This time, a tow truck was hooked to my dad's work van. The van had his business logo on the side. I remembered the day he bought it. He took a picture with it like it was a trophy. Seeing it being pulled onto the flatbed made something low and tired settle in my stomach. Not pain, recognition. Half an hour later, another message came from Carol. "There are 2 men here now. They say he owes them. Mia, what did you do?" I almost laughed at the question. What did I do? As if I were the architect of his debt. As if his choices had been waiting patiently in a folder until I tore them open. I placed my phone beside me on the couch and looked out the window. A few flurries drifted past the glass, light and harmless. Cleveland had settled into its usual winter mood. The streetlights glowed. A couple walked their dog across the parking lot. Life continued, unaware of the collapse happening 2 states away. Around 7:30, my mom called again. This time, she left a voicemail long enough to fill the inbox preview. "Mia, this has gone too far. Your dad is in trouble. Real trouble. These people are serious. The bank froze the account this afternoon. I do not know why. He said something about your name, something about paperwork. He is panicking. You need to help him fix this before it becomes worse. Before it becomes worse. As if the worst had not already been spoken by him 24 hours earlier. I deleted the voicemail without listening to the rest. At 8:40, I received another message. This one from an employee who had worked at the shop since I was a teenager. He said the sheriff had posted a notice on the door. I knew what it was before opening the attachment. A lien form. Unpaid taxes. It was only a matter of time. When a business starts crumbling, the government does not come first. It sits and waits, and then it arrives, all at once. By 9:15, my phone buzzed with a message from my mom again. Her words came rapidly, unspaced, like she was typing them while shaking. They are talking about filing bankruptcy. They are talking about losing the house. Your dad is out of his mind. He said you ruined everything. Then he said you could still fix it. Please call. Just call. Help us. I put the phone face down again and breathed slowly. It was not my job to save a man who had gambled with my life. It was not my job to rescue someone who had placed me on a scale next to his debt and found the debt heavier. It was not my job to cushion the fall created by years of denial. I sat in the dim living room and let the minutes pass. The next message came at 10:30 from my Uncle Ron. He had always been the family mediator, the one who believed everything could be solved with a calm conversation and a firm hand on someone's shoulder. His message was simple. Come home tomorrow. Your dad needs you. Home. The word looked wrong on the screen. At 11, my phone rang again. My dad. I let it ring. 30 seconds. 40. Silence. Then another call. And another. A voicemail. 2 more calls. The persistence was familiar. Except the intention had finally revealed itself. He had lost what he wanted most. Not me. The solution I had once offered him. The one he assumed he could reclaim with the right kind of pressure. Midnight crept in. Snow tapped lightly against the window. My apartment felt warm, safe, mine. The next morning, Sunday, I stepped outside to get the mail and found Mrs. Hall standing in the hallway, in her slippers, arms crossed, watching me with that clear, steady look she had. Your dad was here again, she said, early, maybe 7:30. He knocked. He waited. I told him you were not home. He asked when you'd be back. I said I did not know. I thanked her. She nodded. Then she said something that surprised me. Everyone reaches a point when they have to decide who they're protecting. I think you finally stopped protecting the wrong person. Her words stayed with me for hours. By noon, my phone filled again. Messages from cousins. A few from numbers I recognized from childhood but had not spoken to in years. A flurry of guilt wrapped in polite demands. Your dad is breaking down. He says you are the only one who can help him. Be the bigger person. You are good at this stuff. You always fix everything. I stared at the last one for a long time. You always fix everything. That had been the problem since I was old enough to understand what responsibility felt like. At 2:30 in the afternoon, my mom sent a message that made me sit down slowly. They will take the business, Mia. The house, too. He will lose everything. You cannot let this happen to him. Not now. Not like this. For a moment, I felt a familiar tug inside me. Not compassion, obligation. The old script. The one where I show up, reorganize the disaster, sacrifice my peace, and let him climb onto my back again. But the pull faded almost as soon as it appeared. You cannot let this happen to him. He had let worse happen to me. I stood up, walked to the sink, filled a glass with water, and drank it all before I replied to anyone. My hands did not shake. My breath stayed even. At 4:15, my mom called again. I answered this time. She began speaking immediately, words tumbling over each other. Everything is falling apart. The creditors are on him. The bank froze the accounts. He said you shredded something important. He said you are the reason he cannot fix it. You need to come home. You need to talk to him. He is desperate. Her voice cracked on that last word, as if desperation were a virtue when it belonged to him. I waited until she stopped. I said only one sentence. I am not stepping back into this. Silence. Then her voice rose in disbelief.
You cannot mean that. You cannot abandon him. He is your dad.
I took a slow breath. He abandoned me first. She inhaled sharply, like the truth had drawn blood. You are being cruel. I closed my eyes. No, I am being clear. She fell silent again. A long moment passed. Then she asked the question she had been circling around. So you won't help him? Not even once more? I felt something settle in my chest, solid and unmoving. No, not anymore. I heard her exhale, a soft sound of shock or disappointment, or both. She said nothing else. I ended the call. The quiet after she hung up felt like a door clicking shut. Outside, snow drifted past the window again, soft and steady, the kind that accumulates without sound. I watched it fall, feeling neither relief nor guilt. Just certainty. People assume karma is loud, that it arrives with thunder or wreckage or dramatic timing. But I had learned something different. Sometimes karma sounds like a tow truck hooking a work van. Sometimes it looks like employees are finally walking away. Sometimes it moves through bank accounts and liens and notices taped to doors. Sometimes it arrives quietly in the form of a daughter who finally stops answering. My phone buzzed once more. I did not reach for it. For the first time in my life, the boundary held. The boundary held, and for a long while, nothing inside me moved. Not anger, not fear, not the familiar instinct to go running toward a fire that someone else had started. Just quiet. I sat on my couch with the late afternoon light spreading across the floor, the kind of soft winter brightness that makes everything look cleaner than it is. My phone lay face down beside me. It vibrated once, then went still. I did not reach for it. Not right away. At some point, I stood, made tea, and washed the same mug twice because it gave my hands something to do. The snow outside thickened, drifting sideways in slow sheets. A plow rattled down the street. The world carried on. It felt strange and comforting at the same time. Around 6:30, when the light had faded completely and the apartment had settled into the soft quiet of evening, I finally picked up my phone. I did not open the messages. I did not scroll through the missed calls. I went straight to voicemail. One new message from my dad. I stared at the screen for several seconds, thumb hovering above the play button. A part of me expected his voice to undo me. Another part knew it wouldn't. There was nothing left in me that could be shaken the way it once was. I pressed play. His voice came through the speaker on a slight delay, a half breath of static before the sound shaped itself into words. Mia. It's me. He paused. Not long. Just enough that I imagined him staring at the dashboard of his car, rubbing his forehead the way he always did when he was trying to appear vulnerable without actually being vulnerable. I know you're upset. I know you think He trailed off. A sharp exhale followed, like he wanted the sentence to finish itself. Look, I messed up. All right, I'll say it. I messed up. I shouldn't have said some of the things I said. People exaggerate when they're stressed. You know that. I was talking. I didn't mean any of it the way you took it. I closed my eyes. There it was. The shape of a confession, without the weight of one. An admission of error without ownership. A rearranged version of responsibility, where intention mattered more than impact. The same pattern he had used my entire life. He continued, You shouldn't have left like that. You scared your mom. You scared me. I thought something happened to you. I drove all the way to Cleveland trying to make sure you were all right. That should mean something to you. It sure as hell meant something to me. I leaned back against the couch cushion, letting his words pass through me without settling. He sounded tired. Not remorseful, just tired. Look, I need you to come home. Not for me, for the family. Everyone is shaken up. The business is in a hard spot. Things got complicated. But this cannot be how you handle things. You're better than this. You walk away when things get rough, and it just makes everything harder for you, everyone else. I opened my eyes at that. The familiar script. The guilt. The reframing. The idea that my boundary was an inconvenience, that my absence was the problem, and not his choices. His voice softened in a way that used to work on me. You know I love you.
I may not say it right, but I do. You can't just disappear. Not like this.
We need to sit down and talk, face to face. You owe me that much.
Oh, the word tightened something in my chest, not because it hurt, but because it made everything suddenly, sharply clear. He paused again. When he spoke next, his tone slid into frustration, the kind that sits just beneath fear. I'm trying here. Call me back. Tonight. Do not make this harder than it already is. The message clicked off. The silence afterward felt oddly clean, like someone had wiped a foggy mirror. I held the phone in my hand and let my mind walk through each sentence, not emotionally, just analytically. That was the luxury of distance. I could hear him without absorbing him. He had admitted messing up, but never said he was sorry. He acknowledged stress, but not harm. He framed his fear as my responsibility. He placed the collapse of the business next to my refusal to rescue him, as if the two were equal. He said he loved me, but in the same breath said I owed him my presence. He wanted to repair, but not accountability. There was a difference between regret and responsibility, and I finally understood it in a way I never had before. Regret is about discomfort. Responsibility is about change. He was uncomfortable. That much was clear, but nothing in his words suggested he intended to change. He wanted me to return to the role I had played all my life, the one where I managed the damage he created, the one where I stood in the line of fire and pretended it was warm. I set the phone down on the couch beside me and stared at the wall. For several minutes, I did nothing. Didn't cry, didn't shake, didn't feel tempted to call him back. The quiet inside me felt steady, like a foundation finally settling after years of instability. I thought about the shredded papers, the rescue plan, the hours, the months, the part of myself I had poured into something he never asked for, but always expected. And I realized the voicemail had confirmed everything the storm had already revealed. He was sorry for the consequences, not the actions. Sorry for the collapse, not the sentence. Sorry that I had hurt him, not that he had said it. The difference felt enormous, a dividing line drawn through years of blurred boundaries. I picked up the phone again, not to call him, but to listen to the message one more time. I wanted to make sure I had heard it correctly. I wanted to examine the shape of his words with the clarity of someone who finally understood her own worth. When the recording ended, I sat there for a moment. Then I pressed delete. It felt final, not dramatic, just accurate. I expected to feel anger. I didn't. What I felt instead was distance, a steady, quiet distance that made room for the truth of what he was capable of and what I no longer needed to be responsible for. The voicemail disappeared from the screen, and with it went the last tether, connecting me to the version of him I had been trying to salvage. Outside, the snow had stopped. The world looked washed clean, pale and still. I turned off my phone and set it on the table. For the first time, it did not feel like avoidance. It felt like peace. I turned off my phone and set it on the table, and for the first time, it did not feel like avoidance. It felt like peace. A simple, steady peace that did not demand anything from me. I sat there for a while, listening to the quiet apartment around me. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint shift of the hallway pipes as the building settled into the evening. Chill. Then I stood, stretched my arms over my head, and walked to the window. Outside, the world had settled. Cleveland in winter always looked a little fragile, like the whole city paused between breaths. Streetlights reflected off the snow in long, soft streaks. Someone down the hall was cooking something with garlic. A dog barked once, then fell silent again. Life resumed its ordinary rhythm, and strangely, so did I. I went to bed early, not because I was tired, but because I felt done. Done with the noise, done with the spinning, done with being pulled into a gravity that was never mine to carry. The sheets felt cool against my legs, and the pillow settled around my cheek. I closed my eyes and listened to the building breathe. The next morning I woke without the heaviness that had weighed on me for days. My body felt tired, but not in that bone-deep way that comes from emotional labor. More like the tiredness after cleaning out a room you have been avoiding for years. a purposeful exhaustion. I made coffee and stood barefoot in my kitchen, watching the steam curl up toward the ceiling. I felt present, grounded, alive. That alone felt like a victory. I pulled on jeans and a sweater and drove to the office. The roads were clear, the sky pale blue, the kind of brittle winter sun that offers light without warmth. When I walked into TurnCore Advisors, the front desk receptionist looked up at me with surprised eyes, like she had expected me to take another day off. "Morning, Mia," she said. In the morning, I answered, setting down my bag. Sarah spotted me before I reached my desk. She walked over with that careful expression she used when she sensed something was off, but did not want to pry. "You good?" she asked quietly. I nodded, a real nod. Not the kind you give to avoid follow-up questions. "Yeah, I am." She accepted that with a soft nod of her own. Maybe she believed me, or maybe she simply trusted I would talk when I needed to. She patted my arm gently and went back to her office. For the first time in weeks, I did not open any personal files. I did not search my dad's name in public records. I did not check business listings or credit histories. I focused entirely on the restructuring case I had been assigned earlier in the month. Numbers, plans, solutions for people who asked for help. Work that stayed in its lane. It felt like oxygen. At lunch, instead of eating at my desk, I walked outside. The cold air hit my face like a rinse of clarity. I bought a sandwich from the cafe across the street and ate it on a bench, watching traffic pass in slow loops. I realized halfway through the meal that I had not thought about Buffalo once. Not even in the edges of my mind. It startled me. In a good way. Around 1, an alert pinged on my phone. Not a call. Just a headline from a notification system I had forgotten I subscribed to. Local business filings in Erie County. Carter Precision Parts filed Chapter 7 bankruptcy. I stared at the screen. No shock. No sadness strong enough to unsteady me. Just a quiet recognition. The business had been my dad's pride. His identity, his proof that he was a man who built something. Seeing it disappear felt surreal, but also inevitable, like watching a tree fall after years of rot. I clicked the rest of the notice. Asset liquidation scheduled. Property lien confirmed. Equipment auction pending. Concrete facts. No theatrics. No tragedy. Just the legal language of consequence. 2 minutes later, another notification. Not a headline. A voicemail transcription from my mom. "Your dad is staying at your uncle's place for now. He is quiet. I do not know what to tell you." I deleted it. On my drive home that evening, the city lights reflected off Lake Erie in fractured streaks. The water looked cold enough to shatter. I parked in front of my building and sat in the car for a minute, letting the engine click as it cooled. This time I did not feel the old weight of responsibility tightening around me. I felt only the steady certainty that none of this was mine to repair. Inside my apartment, I changed into comfortable clothes, warmed some leftovers, and settled onto the couch with a blanket over my legs. A normal night. And somehow, that normalcy felt more powerful than any confrontation could have. Over the next week, life unfolded quietly, peacefully. I went to work, I came home, I bought groceries. I slept through the night instead of waking at odd hours replaying conversations that had never served me. I no longer jumped when my phone buzzed. I no longer flinched thinking about Buffalo. My nervous system stopped bracing for impact. I chose to stay grounded, present, alive. Meanwhile, the consequences for my dad continued their quiet descent. His house went into foreclosure. I learned this from my cousin, who texted me a photo of the notice taped to the garage door. Another cousin mentioned that my dad's truck had been repossessed, and someone else, maybe my aunt or uncle, said he had been calling around for a bankruptcy attorney, only to learn he could not afford one. None of it gave me pleasure. It just felt like watching gravity work on something that had been held up too long by hope and denial. One evening, near the end of the month, my mom called. I let it go to voicemail. She said she wished things were different. She said the family felt fractured. She said my dad was trying. She said he was hurting. She said he did not deserve this. She said I should reconsider. She said many things meant to soften me, but none of them addressed the truth. She never said he was sorry. She never said he understood. She never said he took responsibility. Without those words,
Everything else was just noise. Later that night, I sat cross-legged on my living room floor sorting through old papers. Not my dad's. Mine. Bills, work documents, travel receipts, notes from conferences I barely remembered attending. Small things I had been meaning to organize. At some point, I realized I was smiling. Not a big smile, just a soft one. The kind that comes from recognizing the quiet blessing of your own space. My life had never felt this simple, this steady, this mine. A few days later, the last message came. Not directly from him, through my mom again. He says he hopes you are safe. I read it once, then again. Not because of emotion, because of clarity. That sentence carried none of the weight it once might have. It felt like a closing bell, a gentle reminder that stories end in many ways, and some endings are quieter than you expect. I walked to the window and watched the snow fall under the street lamp. Each flake drifted slowly, peacefully, as if unconcerned with anything human beings do to one another. I had survived a storm much larger than weather, and I had chosen myself. Not out of spite, not out of revenge, out of preservation, out of truth, out of the understanding that love is not proven by sacrifice. And boundaries are not cruelty. They are clarity. The next morning, I returned to my routines. I brewed coffee. I answered emails. I scheduled meetings. I laughed at something Sarah said in the break room. I lived. Not dramatically, not triumphantly, just honestly. That was enough. Weeks later, when I thought of Buffalo, it felt distant, like a chapter in a book I no longer needed to reread. The storm had passed, not because the weather changed, but because I stepped out of its path. That was the quiet part of choosing life. Sometimes it looks like leaving. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like waking up and realizing you feel light enough to start again. I turned off the lamp, settled into bed, and exhaled. For the first time in months, I slept without dreaming. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.